Next up, we have Matt Brooke, who is the Head of Development at GL Education.
Oh, thank you very much for inviting me.
No problem, Matt. Lovely to see you. And yeah, thanks for coming in and talking to us today.
No problem. So to introduce myself, I'm the Head of Development at GL Education. We provide a range of formative assessments, which typically used by schools. We had an example. One of the chaps in the office came in and said that his son was sitting one of our tests, so it's certainly very popular within schools in the UK. I joined GL, I think it was November last year, so that was during the pandemic, and I was interviewed remotely, started the work remotely from my spare room in Middlesbrough, and it was several months before I got to meet an actual colleague face to face. It was a very, very different experience.
I can imagine. Yeah, it must have been really odd kind of joining an organization mid-pandemic. How did you find that?
It was to be honest, at the time it was utterly bizarre, but this was not unusual because the whole world was bizarre to me at the time during the pandemic. It was like nothing I'd ever experienced in my life before. As with everybody, the whole population was caught very much by surprise, I think, for the pandemic. Within my position, so I've typically been a software developer, and taken on this position as head of development was very much a people-centric role. And one of the things that was very, very different is my engagement with people. How do I communicate with people? How do the teams communicate with each other? And as a nation, as a population, as an industry, we have to adapt. We have to adapt incredibly quickly. It was interesting as you were talking to Natalie there. I remember those, I won't say fond memories, but there were certainly very, very long-lasting memories of where we got the call to say start working from home, and I remember that in my previous job being I was like, all right, okay, we'll see how this goes. And then I remember texting my friend to say things have got very, very real, because we got the message to say that we're going to shut the schools, and that was quite serious, we knew at that point. So change was forced upon us all. Within the industry, though, I don't think there's anyone who's really better placed to respond to the kind of change that we were asked to by the government, to go and leave your offices, go home, but try and work. I don't think we could have been better prepared for it, really.
And yeah, you kind of mentioned before about change, and that is a lot of what agile is about adapting to that change and trying to do that as quickly as we can. What do you think the industry has learned from, and you mentioned you joined the organization mid-pandemic. What do you think the industry's learned from recruiting during the pandemic?
So I see that in terms of the pandemic, it was kind of broken up into distinct phases, and that kind of made reference already to the initial one, which was incredibly impactful, and there was a lot of panic. And I remember when we were told by the government we could have an hour exercise, and even that felt like a bit of a treat at the time. Things were really, really serious in the beginning, and unfortunately a lot of firms couldn't adapt as quickly as the world needed them to, and people lost their jobs, unfortunately. Other firms cut back, so for example contract staff, who were typically the first when you're looking to reduce numbers, are the ones who suffer the first. There was lots of change and lots of uncertainty initially at the beginning of the pandemic, and things did eventually start to settle down. So over the last 18 months, there's, like I said, there's these distinct phases, but as the industry settled down and everybody was sent home and people started to adapt, and as myself as a parent, I've got a 5-year-old boy, and we were balancing work, home, all in the same place, these things used to happen in different places before. Work was you went to work, school was you went to school, but now it's all in the same place. And we all had to change and adapt and work out how things were going to go. You know, it was fairly commonplace, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. I would echo what Natalie said about people getting disturbed because the goats are bleating, or my son's coming in to show me a nice picture while I'm having a really hard-hitting meeting or really tough discussion with somebody, and I've got a nice little cow picture presented to me. Or what my son used to do, which was my favourite thing for him to do, was bring me Haribo, which was lovely. I always liked him when he brought sweets. But the industry, certainly within the UK, what I found was, I remember pre-pandemic, so I worked for a firm in Stockton-on-Tees, and we had another office which was in Surrey, and we were quite proud of the fact that in the northeast, typically wages were about 20 to 30% cheaper than those in the commuter belt in London. And then, as part of the pandemic, what happened is the country got flattened, not physically. No, there was no big steamroller that went through, but the internet leveled the kind of the geography of the country, and people could work in Newcastle, Middlesbrough, or Stockton-on-Tees, where I was working, for a firm that wasn't in those places, whether it was in Cornwall, Land's End, John O'Groat, wherever it was. We're all in the same time zone, and we can work just as well 5 miles as 500 miles from each other. And what happened is that the market, so when things start to settle down and people start to recruit again, the market cottoned onto this. And what happened previously, particularly for firms in London who were having to pay a significant premium to get people who could come into the office, were able to untap that market, that much wider marketplace. And what happened is people could work from Newcastle, Sunderland, Middlesbrough, for a firm in London, get potentially a higher wage, but do it from the comfort of the spare room or from the dining table. And as such, you know, the industry's had to kind of cope with that, and there's been a lot of changes that's happened. You know, the kind of recruitment strategies that are used have got to be different. You can't just offer a job. You've got to offer a job in a set of circumstances within a context, and that context has got to be appealing to people, much more so than we've had before.
Brilliant. Thanks. Yeah, appreciate your time, Matt. And Matt's going to be joining us as well for the panel questions at the end. So looking forward to that. Thank you, Matt.
Thank you.
If anybody does have any questions for Matt or Natalie or any of our other guests specifically, please feel free to pop them in the panel Q&A, and we can pick up on those.